Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar. We are speaking today on the subject of from red flags to real fixes. Can AI help clean up scientific publishing? And we have a very esteemed panel of guests here today who will be who will be discussing this. Before we get on to that, there's a couple of housekeeping issues to let everyone know about. First of all, if you're looking for a certificate of attendance, that will be handled separately. If you want to ask us any questions, there is a tab called Q&A. It's the third icon down on the panel on the right hand side. Please post your questions in there. There is also an option to chat with your fellow webinar attendees, and everyone's saying hello to each other and reporting in from around the world, and it's fascinating to see where everyone's from. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we can start the webinar. Oh, yes. I have to do a few hoops first before we can share the screen. Does that work? I hope you can see a PowerPoint slide here.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So this webinar is brought to you by Edited in partnership with Ease. So we are very grateful for them to help promote this as a part of Peer Review Week 2025. So Editage is a part of Cactus, and we just have to show you this slide, which shows you that we have offices around the world. We partner with some of the world's top publishers and universities and institutes, and we've been doing a lot of interesting stuff for the last 23 years. Primarily it was manuscript editing. Nowadays it's more involving AI services to both publishers and researchers. And Editage itself is a partner with over 40 publishers. We've done over 2 million edited manuscripts by more than 3 million researchers. And if you ever need any of these both services or any of the publisher services, you should come and speak to us. Okay, the corporate stuff's done out of the way. Now it's time to introduce you to the panelists. And we have 4 wonderful panelists here today. I'm going to ask them if they would introduce themselves so I don't make any mistakes. And we're going to start off with Phil Jones. So Phil, could you introduce yourself, please?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Excellent. All right, so my name's Phil Jones. As it says on the slide there, I'm the co-founder of the More Brains Cooperative, which is a consultancy. There's 4 of us based in 3 different countries. We do a lot of work around things like research infrastructure, research management, and we help publishers understand how to adapt to the new sort of open access world and landscape, and refine their business models. We work with funders and people like NRENs, like JISC and ARDC and SURF and folks like that around research infrastructure strategy. My original background is that I was a physicist, and then I moved into biophysics for a little while before I left academia and became initially a publisher working at Journal of Visualized Experiments, and then for a long time at Digital Science, where I was I did a number of different roles, from outreach to product innovation and a variety of other things. So my last job before becoming a consultant was CTO at Emerald Publishing, and since then I've been first of all as an independent consultant, and then with the Morebrains folks. Additionally, I'm also a member of the EASE Council, so I'll sort of declare that as well, and I also work with the African Journal Partnership Program, and and a couple of other things there which I won't spend too much of your time going over. Yeah, thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Phil. That's wonderful. Our next panelist is Rebecca Lawrence. Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. So I'm Rebecca Lawrence. I am founding managing director of F1000, which is an open research publisher that we set up back in 2012 to try and rethink scholarly publishing and really help to support open research practices. So big focus on open data, on open peer review, how we can try and minimize bias in the process, increase transparency, improve research integrity, etc. Actually, about 2 weeks ago, my role changed. So I'm now Vice President of Knowledge Translation at Taylor & Francis. So F1000 joined Taylor & Francis back in 2020. And so that's more looking at how we better translate research findings to support societal impact, and obviously research integrity and AI are key elements of making sure that the information that's being shared with the broader community is trustworthy. A few other things that I either do or have done. So I'm vice chair of DORA, which is the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which looks at how can we better incentivize and reward and assess research and researchers to really address actually a lot of the challenges that we have in the research system around research integrity. And then a whole host of other things that I've done over the years, particularly thinking around peer review, open data, and the broader research system, working quite closely with a lot of funders, for example, as F1000, and a variety of different things. Real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And our third panelist is Laura Etchells from Emerald. Laura?
Hello, hi. I hope everyone can hear me. Very nice to be here today. I'm Laura Etchells. I'm Head of Research Integrity at Emerald Publishing. Emerald is a scholarly publisher of journals and books, predominantly in the social sciences, subjects such as business management, education, some engineering titles too. And I've worked in publishing for nearly 20 years now, mostly actually in commissioning areas, so working a lot with editorial teams and authors all around the world. And so in my role as Head of Research Integrity, I now sort of really focus on safeguarding the quality and the trust of Emerald's books and journals. So in my team, we focus on investigations into potential misconduct and unethical behaviour, but we also look after our publishing ethics policies, making sure these are as clear and accessible as they can be, and also really focus on that education piece as well, working with editors, authors and reviewers to educate them on responsible research practices. So yeah, that's me. I'm very happy to be part of this panel today and to discuss this interesting topic.
Great, thank you, Laura. And our fourth and final panelist is Dr. Jennifer Wright. Would you like to introduce yourself, Jennifer?
Sure, thanks, Chris. Can everyone hear me as well?
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Yeah, perfect. So lovely to be here, everyone. I'm looking forward to the discussion today. I'm Jennifer Wright and I work at Cambridge University Press. So CUP publish just over 450 journals, about 1,500 books a year. And this is across a really wide range of disciplines. So we do everything from, life science, physical science, arts, humanities, social science. So it's a very broad publisher. My role at CUP is much like Laura's role. It's publishing ethics and research integrity. So as Laura said, that means supporting our editors with best practice, with policy, training and guidance, but also supporting them when things go wrong. So helping them investigate things and tackle issues. Like Phil, before I moved into publishing, I was an academic. So I was more used to running around a forest measuring trees than looking at research integrity issues. But I made my way into publishing after my postdoc. I also have an MBA from Cranfield University, and I'm an elected COPE Council member too. So I'm really looking forward to discussing this with you all today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. I will stop sharing my screen in a second. Just to reiterate, if you have any questions for us, please leave them in the Q&A box next to the chat option on your screen. And I'm going to stop sharing now, so hopefully you can see us all full screen again. Wonderful. So we have several broad themes we'd like to explore this afternoon. Given this is peer review, we will be largely looking at the angle around how peer review is evolving. But a lot of this will involve what you might term research integrity. So checks on things like the metadata, reference list, citation cartel, image manipulation, things like this. I think there's a sense that checks like those are coming immediately now after acceptance, and it's only once an article has passed some of these that the article will enter into the peer review process. So the kind of a pair of quality assurance checks, if you like, which to my mind anyway seem to be merging, but we'll come on to that in a second. So AI in academic publishing. AI has obviously affected the landscape of research integrity quite a lot in the last few years. There's a sense that AI has kind of accelerated some of the challenges that we see in academic publishing these days. How do you think AI has changed the landscape of research integrity in the last few years? And Phil, I'm going to come to you first with that question, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely, sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so it has changed the flavour of the discussions quite a lot. I remember just a couple of years ago, I was at an STM association, an STM week down in London. The first week of December every week, the STM Association has a series of one-day conferences and seminars for those who are not familiar. And one of them was the Research Integrity Masterclass, I think it was. And it was somewhat of a it was under Chatham House rule because it was that sort of discussion, and it was off the back of a publication that STM and COPE had jointly done into the prevalence of paper mills. Now, those of you who are familiar with paper mills know that these sort of large industrial sort of organized crime sort of things that are going on, where people are generating fake papers in order to get publications. And you can basically go online onto various sort of instant messenger apps like Telegram, for example, and you can buy yourself a paper and they'll guarantee acceptance into some high profile journal, or at least they say they will. And there's a whole economy that's sort of built up around it. They found the prevalence of this was about 2% across the entire scholarly literature. That was their estimate. But in some journals, it was as high as 60%. Which is really interesting finding, and it goes to show they go after what they call the weak spots. But the interesting thing about that is all of that was before Gen AI, before ChatGPT was launched. So before we had AI, this stuff was still going on an industrial scale. What's happened is that it's become an awful lot easier and an awful lot cheaper to do it. So you used to have an army of people in warehouses somewhere, in a low wage economy, bashing away creating this content. But now a computer can do it at a fraction of the cost, and it's an awful lot easier. What's also changed is it's an awful lot harder to detect. So those of you who work in this field are probably familiar with these sort of tortuous sentences detection type things that exist, where you can spot a sentence where some of the words have been swapped out, and there are these sort of distinctive patterns of sentences that repeat over and over again that are coming out of these paper mills that sort of create this network of information. And that sort of thing requires it to be an old-fashioned, hand-done, tortuous sentence, Roget type, fake paper, but it cannot detect things like generative AI detected created text. So what's happened is it's gotten easier, it's gotten cheaper, and it's also gotten much harder to detect. And as a result, we're taking it an awful lot more seriously than we were 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe we should speak to a couple of people who are at the coalface, as it were. Jennifer, I'll start with you. How do you think the challenges of AI have manifested themselves in the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years? Have you seen a massive increase in, let's call it, misconduct?
I mean, I think Phil gave a really good overview there of the fact that it's kind of like an accelerator pedal, right? I mean, these things have always happened, really. We've had people who are willing to present dishonest research, who are willing to make up data. It was just a lot harder and more expensive to do. So I think maybe one of the shifts we've seen is almost like a response to that it's no longer that the value is in creating the fake stuff. It's persuading people to trust or to adopt or to publish the fake stuff. So I think we're maybe seeing more attempts at sort of infiltration of editorial processes. So like creation of fake personas who can serve as reviewers or as editors, sort of attempts to mimic journals to sort of attract papers that look like they're published by the actual journal, but it's not, it's a completely different website. So I think maybe one of the shifts has been away from the content creation side to the kind of, I guess, upstream, downstream, however you want to look at it, fraud. So from my perspective, I think that's one of the recent changes. I don't know if Laura has a similar experience.
Yeah, I think that's completely right, Jennifer. I think that is where, we have seen those challenges. And I think it's, every year you develop new ways in which to kind of safeguard the content. And then those challenges just step up another level. And I think that's when we're thinking of where we see these challenges with AI, I think thinking about where we stay one step ahead of these kind of bad actors is an ongoing challenge. And I think just the landscape's changed so much. It's a continuously kind of changing entity. How we can kind of continually develop strategies to kind of stay one step ahead of it is definitely a challenge. I would say in the, to try and take us out of the doom and gloom and try and kind of be a bit of positive spin on things. I think if you think about AI in a broader sense and not in the kind of generative AI sense, but more in the kind of tools and technology sense, it is actually enabling us to be more proactive in spotting some of these anomalies in research papers. So where in the past we may have acted on a suspicion, some strange activity or something strange with, after publication, we're actually able to kind of detect these anomalies much earlier on in the process. And that's really key to peer review, because it's, we want to kind of remove these fraudulent papers before too much resource has been spent on them. So that's, one positive of how kind of technology is evolving.
Great. And yeah, it's fascinating to think, is there a positive side to this? So obviously some AI tools now, not generative AI, but just regular AI tools, can be used to screen submissions and flag up manuscripts where there may have been some misconduct, but it often feels as though it's a game of whack-a-mole, where if you are determined to be a bad actor, you're maybe a step ahead of the publisher every time. Rebecca, I'd like to bring you in here, just stepping back for a second. Are we in a very odd moment of academic publishing right now where it feels like we're creating problems with AI in academic manuscripts that we are then using AI to solve? It feels like not a very good use of our time or computing resources. How do you see this kind of evolving over time?
Yes, I mean, I think you're right. We are at a very odd time, and actually, there's a number of really big pressures on the research system right now that are all sort of coinciding, right? So we have got the fact that now large language models are available, and the ability to scale what was already problematic behavior. We've also got increasing funding pressures around the world, right? We've got increasing geopolitical issues around the world. We've got a whole series of things that are all coming together at the same time. And a lot, as with a lot of the problems with publishing and the research system, a lot of it comes down to actually the way that we sort of incentivize and reward researchers, the way that careers are so interlinked to this. So there's so much hyper competition, and particularly as funding decreases in various regions in the world, that's only going to get worse. And part of that is what forces researchers down the route of doing things that they probably wouldn't otherwise if they weren't under such extreme pressure to deliver high impact content to get into journals at volume. So to some extent, part of trying to address this is trying to tackle some of those pressures that push researchers into finding that they end up having to use some of these problematic activities just to retain a job and to get funding and all of those sort of things. Mm-hmm. And I guess the other side of this is, one of the things that we can do is a lot more sort of training and education in terms of how to spot, some of these, fake journals and predatory publishing, and all of these activities that are actually quite hard for a researcher to spot, that they're sort of being lured into something. Mm-hmm. So there's a mixture, I think, of that, and then a mixture of the issue that increasingly I think it is becoming incredibly lucrative for what essentially are cartels, right, that are making enormous amounts of money, being able to use AI tools and sell, or rather LLM tools, and sell these authorship on papers at very big volumes. So there's a bigger fundamental issue than just us training people how to publish and
so
publish in a different way better.
It does sometimes feel like we're trying to address the symptom rather than the cause of this. And if I can bluntly summarize what you said and try to put some controversial words into your mouth, it's kind of the university's fault that we're in this situation, because authors are trying to improve their career chances by publishing by any means necessary in high impact journals, and they'll go to any lengths to do that, including manipulating data, buying authorship, and perhaps we, as everyone on the call here, can only address the symptoms, but the cause needs to be addressed as well. I think that's kind of what you were saying anyway.
Yes, no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not just universities, it's funders, it's even governments that have, you know, series of journals and requirements that maybe pay you. You know, we know there are some countries that will pay you large sums of money if you get into very, very high impact journals. So I don't think we can only lay it at universities' doors. I think it's the whole system. That's why, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I care so much about what DORA are trying to do, which is trying to really facilitate and support globally and across different disciplines a shift in terms of new policies, new practices. And part of it is building awareness in the first place. I mean, there's a lot of awareness in some parts of the world, an awful lot of the world there isn't. I've just been in Brazil, got back last night, talking with, you know, big funders and big institutions out there. There is definitely some awareness in key places, but there's a lot of communities that are, you know, are not aware that there's an issue even. So that's step one.
Yeah.
And then it's how do we help facilitate change?
Yeah. No, I had some personal experience of that. I used to work in Qatar, and when I went out there, Qatar University was paying authors quite a lot of money, depending on what the impact factor was of a journal at the time. So if you got an article in Nature, you know, hooray, you could go and buy a new car basically. And if you got an article in anything with even the smallest impact factor, you could still treat the family to a meal. So I'm glad to say that is no longer in existence, but I think it's indicative of sometimes, like I say, emerging research economies cling on to a metric and try to game it basically. Let's move on to fraud and our tools for weeding out fraud within academic manuscripts. Phil, I'm going to come to you first. So, a lot of publishers have access to a wide range of tools for spotting which articles should not go on to peer review. Some of these are AI tools. What kind of things are these AI tools good at flagging up? There's a number of issues that seem to be increasing in popularity, if that's the right word, such as image manipulation and citation cartels. Is this the kind of thing AI tools can help with?
Certainly in principle, they can. I mean, and to answer the question directly, or to rather to not answer the question directly of which sort of tools are really good, is the answer is it's too early to tell, to be honest with you. I have yet to see, and I've seen quite a few of these sort of AI detectors, whether it's images or whether it's text, and I've seen many claims about them, but I haven't seen a solid body of evidence yet that something can particularly tell. In fact, I remember OpenAI themselves had to pull their AI detector from sale, because I think they were selling it, because it wasn't even accurate at detecting its own content. You know, never mind AI generated content from other LLMs, and that's compounded by the fact that there's a bias in the training of those LLMs that's inbuilt. And people who do not speak English as a first language, who are writing in English, are far more likely to be flagged as potentially written something that's generated by AI. Particularly, apparently, this is secondhand information. So somebody told me this at the EASE conference a few months ago. Particularly people who are educated in African business schools write in a certain particular distinctive way when they write in English, which is, you know, no surprise, right? There's a sort of a cultural norm of how the English is spoken and written. And so many of those people, so many of the people who'd been hired to train the original algorithms had come from that background, that AI, or particularly OpenAI, GPT, kind of writes a bit like that.
Right.
And so when you write like that naturally, the AI detector thinks you're the AI, because you write the way that the people who train the algorithm wrote. So there's all these sort of built-in biases in it, and it's all a little bit early to tell whether they're really good. The detection systems that I've seen that are quite effective are things that detect pre-AI fraud. So there's an app called Image Twin, which is used by a lot of the sleuths, right, which is really good at detecting the reuse of images and people reusing it not only in their own papers but also from like a database of papers, stuff like that. The tortuous sentence detector is pretty good at detecting when people have taken sentences and swapped out words and all that sort of thing. So those pre-AI things, we've got pretty good detectors for that. But the post-AI stuff, the jury is still out. Just this week, I saw a claim from a company. It's Pangram, it's called, which is Clear Skies are working with, and they claim to have an incredibly low false negative detection. But I haven't seen the evidence myself, and I haven't run the test myself. So all the time there are new ones coming to market and new claims made about them, and I think it's just too early to tell. What I will say works pretty well, as far as I can tell, is the sort of network analysis tools that are out there. So there's a couple of them. Clear Skies is one, Signals is another. They seem to be pretty good at identifying networks of fraud. So you can identify things like the paper mills themselves and sort of root it out on a network search type of approach. That seems to be a much more effective way of at least identifying the bulk of the content that's already been published in the literature. So it's a mixed bag at the minute, and things are changing rapidly.
Okay. And Jennifer and Laura, I'll just come to you quickly. Have you had any notable successes or notable failures when you've been playing around with some of these AI fraud detectors? Let's call them that.
I mean, I can come in on following on from what Phil said. There's kind of an additional layer of complexity here, is that we don't actually ban the use of AI in publications. So even if we had a perfect detector, I mean, we say it's fine. You're allowed to use AI to polish your language. You're allowed to use AI in your research process, and there probably is great value in doing that in some disciplines. So we don't want to kind of end up in a world where we're like, all AI use is bad. There's plenty of good reasons why you would use AI. What we ask for is transparency. So, I mean, really all an AI detector would do is say, we think this person's used AI, but they haven't declared it. So then the editorial action is to like ask for transparency about what kind of use did you use AI for, and then you can cross-check that and validate that with what you can see. So I think this is part of the challenge, right? I think people are grasping for solutions, but there's policy, sort of governance, sort of join up that needs to go in parallel with the tools to make them do what we want them to do. I guess coming back to your question about have we had successes or failures, I'd agree with what Chris said, is that the kind of network analysis is really helpful as a time saver. So often if you're doing an investigation anyway, we find a lot of these tools are very valuable at kind of honing in on what you should look at, or like what the pattern is that you have a hunch might be there, but it would take a person a very long time to kind of map out the links between different citations or between authors and editors, that sort of thing. So that's very powerful. But in terms of the kind of editorial decision making, it's often just like it smells a bit funny. And then the editor has to look at that and then decide some kind of action, like whether that's get a more robust peer review, desk reject it. And I feel there's a lot more we need to work out there in terms of fairness and transparency, like editorial decision making and how that complements peer review. So I think there's a lot to still work out, as Phil said.
Yeah, I think we've been doing a lot of testing really over the last kind of 12 to 18 months on tools that we might be able to embed in that kind of peer review workflow to help us kind of spot some of these problems. And I think, we don't have any absolute horror stories of where it's got it completely wrong, but I think some of the things we've found is that, not all the kind of warning signs that a tool might flag up are signs of any sort of deliberate manipulation. And therefore, you know, it still very much relies on that kind of human-led partnership really with any tools to make that decision. I think, yeah, you know, that there are always going to kind of be false positives there, and you know, looking at the accuracy of these tools to kind of detect any manipulation in the process needs to be really key. I think some of the other examples we've seen, especially when thinking about tools to use to try and kind of spot some of this malpractice, is you know, some, like, I think with our submission system, that's one system that has some kind of guardrails in there to help you check when strange activity has been happening. And then we're sort of you know, like bolting on another system that will look at things. We've seen instances where those two systems are saying completely different things. One's like giving it the green light and one's saying, whoa, look at this. And it's really confusing for our editors to think, well, what do I do here? So I think there's, you know, there's a bit of work in the kind of education on just exactly how to interpret some of this information, and the kind of literacy there, I think, as well.
I guess a lot of these AI detector tools are creating flags which are actually just creating more work for editorial officers to investigate and maybe slowing things down. When perhaps they don't need to. I'm going to come to you, Rebecca, quickly. The idea of us becoming more reliant on AI tools to filter out malpractice, are there any risks you can see with that? If we are relying on some of these AI tools as a first filter, do you think authors might become aware of that and start adapting how they prepare their submission?
Yeah, there's definitely a risk around that, and you know, we already see you know, real examples of that. You know, plagiarism checks like Authenticate have been used for a very long time. And the whole point about, you know, the tortuous phrases and the changing words so that it's similarity rather than, you know, identical phrases, just shows how, you know, people are trying to figure out how to get round these detection tools. It just makes it harder to detect some of the issues. So, as was mentioned by somebody earlier, it absolutely, I think, is a race to some extent. I mean, it sort of depends what we've got to be careful what the tools are trained on, and make sure that some of the biases that we, you know, because as humans, we've got to remember, it's not like it's perfect now. It's as humans, we also have a lot of biases in terms of what we spot. And we need to make sure that the AI tools don't either amplify those biases, depending on what they're trained on, or maybe add even further and worse biases in what they flag. So I think there's definitely some risk that we need to be aware of and we need to think about. And I guess that's where having a whole range of different markers gives you that sort of broader picture, right? So it can help to, you know, each one will have its own bias, but they can help to sort of mitigate against each other if you use a sort of collective set of tools to help us flag, you know, things to look at further. But at the end of the day, they all need it, just like Authenticate always needed a human to look at it at the end. You always need a human to then review it.
It's interesting. I was at a peer review congress a few weeks ago, and I was speaking to someone about plagiarism and the problematic paper screener, which is the tool which looks for these tortured phrases. And I said, isn't this kind of irrelevant now? Because, you know, you can get AI tools to paraphrase your work in such a way that it's not going to set off a plagiarism detector, and it should be smart enough not to use any words that are in the tortured phrase list of problematic words.
Yeah, actually, I have an interesting observation about that. Actually,
Yeah.
that I have been asking publishers over the last sort of couple of years whether they've seen those kinds of papers go down over time. You know, as if they're being replaced by Gen AI created papers, and the answer is yes, but not as much as you might imagine. So they're still really quite surprisingly effective. And what that makes me think is that these, I mean, bear in mind, this is industrial fraud that we're talking about. The people who produce these papers have got factories of people, you know, generating this content, you know, or at least offices full of people, office blocks full of people generating this content. And it, like any organization, it's going to take them time and it's going to cost them money to change the way they do their business. So a really good observation that I heard a year or so ago is that what we have to do is not necessarily find a way to stamp out all fraud and all bad actors. At least when we're talking about the industrial scale fraud, we just have to make it so expensive that it's no longer worth doing. So you have to attack their business model in order to drive them out of business. And so that's the effectiveness of this: is the better we get at detection, the harder it will be and the more expensive it will be, the more they have to charge, and that will drive demand down. So that's the real key to getting rid of that sort of organized crime component of it.
Fascinating. Yeah, haven't thought about that. Let's move along a little bit from the editorial workflow. And a paper's been submitted, we've triaged it for unethical behavior, seems to be okay, let's send it out for review. There's another issue with peer review here right now, which is that we create way more manuscripts than we can feasibly review in a reasonable length of time, let's say. So there's a lot of talk about how AI tools can assist in the peer review process. Laura, I'm going to come to you first. What are your views on this? Where do you think peer review can benefit from AI, if anywhere?
Yeah, I think thinking kind of theoretically, if we think, you know, in an ideal world, how can this really help kind of improve peer review? I think, you know, one of the strengths would be that it's a really credible solution to you know, helping with that volume of peer review that we see these days, with, you know, exponentially rising numbers of submissions and manuscripts, and being able to kind of provide a solution. It feels like that human only solution in peer review is getting less and less viable. So I think it has that ability, obviously, to be scalable and to kind of reduce some of the burden that we're asking kind of editors and peer reviewers to look at. I think in an ideal world, I think this could really lead to better feedback and kind of better critical analysis of research as well. If you think of, you know, where the human and the AI are partners, and they're kind of staying in their own lanes, and they're looking at papers in their own specific ways, we can start to ask peer reviewers and editors to really focus on that subject matter expertise that they are skilled in, and leave some of the other kind of checking of you know, references and the required statements and things like that to an AI, and actually help bring together a really kind of detailed report, which is going to only enhance the research paper and the research. So I think, you know, there are a lot of opportunities there, again, with my kind of ideal world hat on to think about that.
And are you adopting any of these in your current workflow, or what?
We're doing some testing at the moment into how, you know, AI can be used in the peer review process. At the moment, I would say that is limited to helping find the right reviewers. So we know that, you know, there's several challenges in peer review. There's the challenge of finding the appropriate reviewers who have the time and expertise to review the paper. And then there's the review itself and making sure you're getting good quality, detailed, critical feedback. And so I think, you know, our focus at the moment is AI able to kind of help with that kind of that first piece of seeking out those reviewers in order to kind of speed up that process for authors. I think we've done a bit of testing on, you know, the review side of things, and I think when we talk about bias, our testing has shown that, you know, it doesn't work for all publishers, it doesn't work for all research papers. The AI is only as good as the data that it's trained on. So you know, some specialisms just don't necessarily work so well. But I think in helping us to kind of speed up that finding of reviewers and speed up that process, there's kind of real benefits there.
Jennifer, with your CUP hat on, how do you see AI influencing the peer review process, or is it already influencing it?
So, I mean, I think I'm going to go even more philosophical here. I think there's complementarity that Laura was talking about. I think that's really true and valuable in the sense of scaling what we're trying to do. But I think that's the point. What are we trying to do? And I think there's some misconceptions around like what is peer review and what it's for, or maybe not misconceptions, just different conceptions about what it's for. So I mean, you could look at it as a kind of quality assurance process that, you know, we're asking people who are experts to perform some kind of compliance or due diligence kind of process to check something is okay. But personally, I don't think that's what peer review is. I mean, the clue is kind of in the name. It's peer review. I think it's a social process between scholars. It might be an anonymous process, it might be asynchronous, but it's kind of part of the development of a discipline. So I sort of feel like we shouldn't just look at what AI can do for peer review, but how does that impact the reviewers as well? So what's valuable to the people who are conducting the review, not should it just do the review. So I think again, the complementarity comes in here. So it's like, is there a way that reviewers can leverage AI to improve how they do peer review without losing that kind of insight that you gain from seeing what's coming up in your discipline, from engaging critically with developments, that sort of thing. So I think there's, complementarity is the key. In terms of what we're doing, I mean, sort of what we're exploring is like, what do reviewers want to be able to do with AI and peer review? What do people value about peer review as a process? Which, you know, publishers might have a perspective on that, but we serve the academic community. We're there for scholarly societies. We're there for universities, departments, and what do they want to happen? What do they value as important in peer review? So I think that's maybe a bit of a waffly answer, but I think we shouldn't lose sight of peer review as part of the research process, not just like something that happens at the end to check it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm I'm often trying to fly the flag for the role of AI in assisting within the peer review process, but even I, as a kind of optimist on that front, can see there are areas where it's probably not appropriate. I was having a read of a good comment by Zoe Mullen from the Lancet Public Health yesterday, and she was explaining that human voice is important here to reflect the lived experiences of marginalized communities, which you would not necessarily see represented in an LLM, because a lot of this information is not explicitly written down on the internet. So it's not going to be reflected in a lot of training models. And yeah, it's made me moderate some of my opinions on this front as well. I'm just looking at the time. Let's move on slightly, shall we? We're going to look at editorial workflows right now. So Rebecca, I'm going to come to you. Beyond some of these simple plagiarism checks, what else are publishers using AI for in their editorial workflows these days? We heard talk about image manipulation earlier. Are there other things the publishers interested in screening for at the point of submission?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think these kind of tools have been used to try and, look at statistical techniques, for example, for quite a length of time, with some success. And actually, I think to the point about, that if I don't think we're there yet, but I think there's an opportunity for us to, over time, as these tools get better, to help spot things that I think, a human will find very hard to spot. Which could even be things like, how novel is this paper, right? Because a reviewer actually only knows what they know, which is invariably going to be relatively small, however well read the individual is, because the world of papers is exploding. And so it's actually very hard for a human, increasingly, to actually know, well, how novel really is this, and how does this fit in? So, even at that kind of level, as well as some basic things like looking at the detail of the methods, looking at where, what reagents have been used. There's more and more tools trying to spot those, and which antibody exactly was it that you used, because actually which one you used makes a big difference to what the results might mean. So there is I think quite a wide range of different things that AI really could help us with. I think the challenge at the moment is that a lot of the tools that are available are still not really good enough to be used at any scale. So you get a lot of false positives, which uses up a lot of time, but you also get a lot of false negatives, which means you miss a load of things. The only point that I wanted to make was we should just bear in mind that we're not comparing it to a perfect system. I mean, human peer review is also highly problematic. It all depends on, it's a couple of people, depends on how they're feeling on that day, how positive they are as a person, how close and how competitive this paper is with what they're doing. A whole raft of reasons why actually human reviewers are also very biased. So I think it's got to be a balance. We've just got to figure out how to get that balance right.
There was an interesting group kind of self-organized over Christmas time last year called the Black Spatula Group, who are looking at how AI can help weed out some of these what seem like fairly minor mistakes in the published manuscripts, which could have large knock-on effects, I think. And it's interesting to think about where that particular endeavor might end up. So let's say there's some point in the future when AI can analyze a manuscript and find all these small errors. If we fed in everything we've ever published into this AI platform and it flags up significant number of errors in a significant number of manuscripts, I wonder how we will feel about ourselves as an industry, but also as what our grasp on science is. I think this idea of doing a massive retrospective AI-powered analysis of everything we've done so far is potentially very exciting, but also potentially very scary. But also, I think it is inevitable, and it will happen within our lifetimes, certainly. So yeah, that's maybe where some of this work is heading. I don't know how I feel about it, whether it's a good thing or not, but I think it will happen anyway. So we get questions like this quite often in some of the other webinars we do, where sometimes authors are kind of scared about submitting work because they think it will get flagged up somewhere by some tool or other, and actually that breeds a set of behaviors which are counterproductive. So they like to feed their manuscript through plagiarism detectors until the score is as low as they can make it. They like to feed it into other tools to gain a certain metric until it's as high or low as they want. And oftentimes when they submit this finalized manuscript, it has all kinds of problems introduced into it. What are the issues for an author if their manuscript is flagged up before it's even been sent out for review? Is this likely to lead to a desk reject, or is this just something a publisher will say, okay, it's a fairly minor thing, we can fix it in a revised version? Or is there not time to analyze every manuscript on a case-by-case basis? I guess, Jennifer, I'll come to you first as a person handling a large number of submissions.
I mean, I think disappointingly, my answer is going to be it depends. We always advise our journals not to use tools as thresholds. So we don't say anything like, if it's above 25% authenticate, then X. It's more authenticate. If it's a higher score, it might require that you go in and have a look and see if there's an obvious explanation for that. Like, you're quoting a whole paragraph legitimately from another source and it's in quotes and it's fine. So, I mean, it does mean more editorial work, but we would never like reject something just purely on what a tool said. There's always a layer of like human intervention, human analysis on that. In terms of whether you get kind of like a second chance, again, I think it depends on the issue in question and how sort of impactful that is on the manuscript as a whole. So if it was like a technical check, like there was a data availability statement missing or something, probably we'd just send it back to the author and say, our journal requires a data availability statement, please could you supply it? But if it was like a data availability statement was missing and the person assessing the manuscript had concerns that the manuscript was fabricated, and we also had like a network flag on the author, that might then mean that we go, not sure about this manuscript. And then this is what I was saying earlier about the tools have got some way to go, in that I think explicability and transparency is not there yet, even for the editors. So this is even before we get to like explaining to the author what the problem was, or sort of offering a fair reason for a rejection. Sometimes it's very hard to pin it on like one thing. So far, the tools that we're deploying are ones that are very objectively verifiable. So retracted references, for example, that's like a really clear and easy thing that if your article is citing references that have been retracted, you might not even know that for very good reasons. You might have cited it 2 years ago and since something has been retracted. So we would probably go back to the author after having done an assessment to say, this does seem quite a fundamental reference for this manuscript, and ask them to say, you know, we found that this reference was retracted. You know, is there an alternative reference, or could you explain the impact of this on your paper? So those ones are very easy for an editor to kind of go back to the author with a very clear and legitimate reason for why you're responding to a flag from a tool. Something that's more hazy, like it's a bit like a paper 5 years ago that was retracted. We're not using those ones at the moment, but I think that's where the tools are developing in explicability.
Great. And Laura, is that similar to your experience?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of similarities there. I think, you know, I think at the moment in our testing, we are kind of trying to work out which flags are the red flags and which flags are those kind of advisory ones that, you know, you kind of send that to the editor and say, you may want to look at this within the context when you're looking at the article. If there are multiple amber flags, that can lead to a much murkier picture. And so it's really trying to kind of understand there, you know, which ones are kind of advisory and maybe somebody making a mistake. I mean, even on the retracted references, we would look back, you know, when did they submit their paper, when was this paper that they've referenced retracted, you know, we need to kind of look at these things and double check what the technology is telling us. Again, it's about that verification. So yeah, I think it's a very similar picture, that some flags are better than others, and the ones we found most useful are the ones that give us the detail and don't just kind of say big red flag there, don't proceed, because you sort of think, well, why we need to know why. So yeah,
I tell you what, I've done a couple of these webinars now where we've been talking about AI and review and peer review, and I've done a couple with these, and one of the questions that we routinely get is from editors who say, you know, what's the name of the tool that I should buy that's going to detect bad content? And to which everybody goes, we don't have an answer for that, right? And I think that part of what's going on here is that we are resisting the temptation to abdicate our responsibility, our decision-making responsibility, to the machine, right? Because we recognize that that's dangerous, and we recognize that that is flawed. And while you're still getting a lot of products coming out, and a lot of experiments coming out that are about the ability to detect something and tell you whether it's a good paper or a bad paper, I think we're still going to be stuck in this loop, right? Eventually, this technology is going to evolve in such a way that it's going to assist the workflow to make the workflow much more efficient. Now, if you think about what AI is good at, it's good at a couple of things, right? It's good at generating language, right? We know that. So it can talk. You know, you can give it some information and say, rephrase this and make it sound like somebody else's voice, and it can do that really, really well. But it's also really good at retrieval augmented generation. It's really good at going away and finding information and bringing it and contextualizing it and giving it back to you, right? It can hallucinate, but if it gets to the right sources, if you guide it to the right sources, it can process and synthesize really very effectively, and it's getting an awful lot better at doing that. And then we're seeing emerging the AI agent component of this as well, which some smart people say is going to eliminate the concept of the user interface altogether, right? So a lot of what holds people up in workflows, a lot of what's adding to that editorial burden is, you know, the clunky interfaces, the moving the information from one place to another, the ticking the boxes, the selecting the right thing, the pull downs, the type it in again, all that stuff will eventually become easier when AI agents become better at handling those things. And so then we'll be able to separate out the admin and the clunky stuff and the slow stuff from the actual decision making. And I think that's when it's really going to help and really going to make it a lot more efficient. And it'll also make a lot of people's jobs a lot less irritating and annoying as well, I hope.
So I'm trying not to read some of the questions that are coming up in the question and answers here, because they're really fascinating. We will leave enough time to address these. I've got a couple more questions for the panel, and then we'll start answering some of your questions. If you do have a question, can you put them in the Q&A tab so they are collated for our review in a few minutes? So let's just think briefly about some of the ethical considerations around using some of these tools, and let's face it, making decisions on people's careers and lives, professional lives, not in any other sense. If one of these screening tools misses or mislabels manipulated work, who's responsible for correcting that error? Is it the publisher? Is it the reviewer? Is it the person or the company who created those screening tools to start with? Rebecca, I'm going to come to you with that one.
I guess I would say ultimately it depends who's used it, right? So if it's misuse of AI by the author in the paper, then it's the author's responsibility. If it's misused by the reviewer, it's the reviewer's responsibility. If it's misused by the publisher / editor, it's their responsibility, in the sense that all of these, AI can help support all of these roles as long as it's used appropriately, and as long as at the end of the day, it's the human that's responsible and accountable. And it's down to the human that's decided to use the AI tool to make sure they've adequately checked what it's done and used it appropriately. And at the end of the day, they are accountable, I would suggest, for the content, the article, the review, the decision letter, etc. That would be my view.
I think, thinking back to what Rebecca said earlier around the current model of human only kind of peer review, there are times when that gets it wrong too. And, that's we can't forget that it is a fallible system at the moment. And it's not perfect by any means. It feels that you feel a little bit more hardened by, I guess, when it's a computer making that error or saying no. But yeah, I think that is why that kind of hybrid partnership is so key in all of this. And AI is that it's a component of it, but it's not replacing it.
So we're going to put our forward-looking hats on now and think about what may happen in the not too distant future. So in particular, given that we are 3 years into the LLM revolution, this is a reasonably new thing, and it's evolved quite a lot in those 3 years. Let's skip ahead 5 years from now. How do you think AI will be shaping the peer review landscape in 5 years? That's an open question to anyone who would like to jump in. I have my own opinions, but
I jumped the gun, didn't I? I jumped the gun and I already had a go at this, didn't I, earlier on when we were talking about the tools that work and the tools that don't work. I think it's going to enhance workflows. That's going to make it quicker to make decisions, and it's going to take a lot of the drudgery out of stuff by these sort of agents and things that are going to simplify the way that we work and make it easier to make better quality decisions. And it's going to retrieve information for us and marshal it and sort of organize it and synthesize it in ways that's going to make it easier to make these decisions. And it may be doing little assessments and flagging up little signals and all the rest of it, but then there's going to be, because it's easier to access that information and then easier to do the investigation and easier to to connect all the dots, that's going to enhance the human's ability to be able to make the decision about it. I think that's where we're going to end up. The other aspect is that we're going to, and I'll just sort of leave this hanging a little bit, we're going to understand better the limitations of what technology is going to do to solve these problems. And I hope we're going to be looking much more closely at how the social infrastructure supports these challenges and reforming the way we think about it on that level.
That's where my mind went, Phil, is like, I think there's definitely going to be developments in the technology that will lead to kind of practical improvements. But I also hope, I don't know if this will happen, but I hope, coming back to what Rebecca was saying at the beginning, that it kind of forces a more rapid interrogation of what we value and sort of why we value it, so that, like that's a social or a governance or a coordination piece. It's not really a technology piece, but I would hope that in 5 years we might be closer to really seriously getting together and thinking about what we can do about things like reward and recognition and what we value about research and why. And AI might accelerate that conversation. Going back to the accelerator pedal, maybe it will be a helpful accelerator in that.
So maybe I can focus in on one little part of that, which was a question I saw scrolling past in the chat window earlier. Will there be a point when publishers rely on AI for peer review?
I mean, I'm going to say that at the moment it's not for publishers that we do peer review. I mean, publishers publish the output of that process, but it's academics doing it for academics. I know people have different perspectives on quality control or quality assurance and who should play that role in the ecosystem. Is it funders? Is it institutions? Is it publishers? Is it a combination? But I think in terms of scholars critiquing what other scholars are doing, that's not a publisher responsibility. We produce what comes out of that process by what the community decides it values and wants. So I'm going to reframe that a little.
That's interesting, because that would make me say, so maybe preprint and post-publication peer review would be where we're heading. Is that how I interpret what you were saying there?
Well, there's still, so we provide the systems and the processes and the coordination and stuff to facilitate that process, but it's the academics and what, you know, the trajectory they want their discipline to go in, you know, what research is important to that community. That's kind of a big part of what peer review is. So if the systems and processes become coordinating open commentary on preprints, then that is a future scenario, but some disciplines might not want that approach. So I think it's going to be a mixed picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think there's you know, it feels to me like there's yet another argument where open peer review would really help with some of this, because actually by having the peer review open, and particularly if you have your name on it, then as a reviewer you're really accountable for what you've said, but equally you get credit for having spent your human time on it, and so I think that may help to ensure that, sure, AI may be used as part of helping you do that review, and or publishers may help reviewers by flagging things of might be worth looking at this, or this, you know, looks like it may be odd, can you check that, or whatever, right? So that there may be quite an interesting way of bringing those two things together. But I think open peer review can certainly help to minimize some of the risk. But I can't see AI being used, you know, just to do peer review completely on its own. And to be honest, I'd be really concerned if it was, partially because, you know, there's quite a lot of evidence that shows that as AI sort of, particularly if you think about large language models, as they iterate, or even machine learning, as it iterates, often biases get worse and worse and worse. And in fact, there was an interesting paper that came out very recently that was talking about LLMs summarizing content, and that, you know, if you compare it to human summarized content, there are these huge generalizations, in some cases that are just frankly wrong, and the newer versions of the LLMs are worse than the old versions, right? So you're starting to see some of this sort of progression in the wrong direction. The flip side is, I know from having conversations with some of the big LLM providers that actually there's a real interest in creating tools that are trained purely on academic content, not on the whole world of content, which will help, and in making sure there are direct links back to the actual content that it sort of cites and links to, which will help to improve those. So I suspect we'll have a better recognition, better understanding of how to use it, as was mentioned, but I certainly don't think we will be in a let's only use AI. Well, I'll be very concerned if that's where we've ended up in 5 years.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm just looking at comment here in the chat window from Robin Campbell. I'd like to adapt Winston Churchill's comments about democracy to peer review. The current peer review process is the worst form of research evaluation, except all others that have been tried. Indeed, I think that's why it has such longevity. So I'm going to stop asking questions here. As predicted, our audience have supplied a lot of questions. I'm going to ask maybe one each from each of the 6 sections, and hopefully the relevant person will be able to recognize their expertise and jump in and answer it. Let's have a look at this one. So AI's role in scientific publishing. Let's have a look. A question I've heard asked before, and Jennifer and Laura, and even Rebecca, you might want to recuse yourself from this one. Are publishers genuinely interested in cleaning up science, or is the pressure to publish and profit limit how far integrity measures can go? Phil, you're the only one left.
So the question is, are publishers genuinely interested in cleaning up content?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've got 3 very senior people in their publishing organizations in this room, and I can see at least 2 of them have got research integrity in their job titles. Right? And Rebecca, you've perhaps made a career out of research integrity and making sure that content is good and solid, and experimenting with the way that review is done in order to make sure that research is done correctly. So I think there's no shortage of evidence that publishers are legitimately concerned about the quality of the scientific record. Now, if you want to be cynical about that, another reason why perhaps the millionaires or billionaires that own publishing organizations might be particularly concerned is that it's a really serious reputational issue for publishers. In fact, to the extent that, to a certain extent, is a good strong argument that publishers get overly blamed for the misconduct of others because they're the goalkeeper. It's like it's blaming the goalkeeper when somebody scores. There's that sort of temptation or concern about it. And so from a cynical point of view, there have been instances of research integrity and publishing integrity scandals that have impacted company share prices, and things like that. So I think that on all levels, publishers are absolutely interested in doing something. Can they do something on their own? Can they fix it on their own? The answer, I think, is no, because I've argued for a long time that trying to stop research fraud happening at the point of publication is far too late. You can do a lot, but you certainly can't cover all the bases, right? And so what we're going to do one of the things that I talk about when the limits of this and the social infrastructure component of it is that we have to start really understanding the provenance of data and information and being able to sort of trace it all the way through right from the beginning. And there's stuff going on. I think this is another answer to what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. Things like trusted research environments, we're going to see more and more. We're going to see things like being able to certify images within an instrument, like the work that C2PA is doing, or Biocodes is doing, or even the work that STM Association and sorry for the plug, that I'm working on as well, which is about being able to sign images at the point of capture and trace the provenance all the way through the process. Those sorts of things we're going to see a revolution in the way that science is done, and the way that research is done, and the way that information is protected, controlled, and the provenance is guaranteed around it.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to exclude the 3 of you on purpose. I just thought
But you did, though.
Yeah, I thought it was a very controversial topic, but you're welcome to weigh in while I have a look at the next question.
Well, I think if they weren't, I would leave. So.
Yeah. I was going to say, one thing I would say is that I think the investment that publishers are making in areas around research and integrity are huge. To say that we're not contributing towards bottom lines, towards revenues. The investments that they're making in teams, in resources, but also in things like technology, does go to show that we really are invested in cleaning up that scientific literature. And I think a lot of that comes down to the brand value, but you don't want to be a publisher that's known for publishing lots and lots of fraudulent papers. So I think it really does affect that kind of part of it as well. So
So there's a very interesting question here, which I think could potentially solve some of the problems. It says, should there simply be fewer publications? And I don't know if the question means fewer journals or fewer manuscripts that can interpret that either way. What's your opinion on restricting the number of manuscripts? Let's say an author can submit in a year, or a journal could publish in a year. Do you think that would alleviate some of this pressure on the system?
I'm happy to.
Oh, go on.
Okay, shall I start?
Yeah, go for it.
So, this question I think comes up quite a lot. Should we, you know, as you say, minimize the number that we publish? I think there's the number of angles. The answer I would have to that. One is, if you've discovered something, you should be able to share it, and it's really important you share it, because otherwise there's no point in you having done it. So the idea that the solution to the sort of information overload is that we publish less, I think is problematic. I think we need to do a better job of helping us find information in that sort of mountain of new findings. We also, though, I think need to be more nuanced about what we review, how and by whom. Not everything needs to go through the same level of review by the same level of people. And indeed, AI can be a contributor to some of that. As an example, we're actually doing something with the Sanger Centre and the Wellcome Trust to do some partly AI-based review of genome sequences, where the machine that writes the genome sequence will provide a validation report as one of the peer review reports, and then humans will also do some peer review around it. So there are ways of looking at that. The other point I would make, though, is that I do think, and this is more to funders and institutions and the broader system, that we need to make sure that we incentivize researchers to do research better, as it were, and to have the time to do it better, i.e. have the time to iterate the experiment more, the time to curate the data better, so that we're not rushing to get everything out as fast as we can and get as many papers as we can, but rather we do less research, but we do better research, so it's actually more reproducible and more reusable and of greater benefit to others. So a sort of mixed response to that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think just saying fewer journal articles or fewer journals, partially I agree, because I think the purposes journals are used for now, or increasingly used for now, maybe don't need to be journals. So I guess it's what is the point of publication? Is it to share information? Is it to report on stuff? Is it to communicate? And who is it communicating to? And I think there's different vehicles for that. And then you layer in like machine readers as well. Like, do they need a journal article? Maybe not. So I think there should be some development in like how research is communicated overall. And some of those things might still be journal articles, and they may be well suited to being journal articles, but there's lots of other options for how results can be shared and people can collaborate and things can be validated at different stages. I think maybe we're starting to unpick some of that with some of the experimentation that's going on now. So overall, I'd say yes, I think we should publish fewer journal articles, depending on what we want journal articles to be for. And that's a system-wide thing to figure out, not just a publisher job.
Well, that leads on quite nicely to the final question, which is from the audience again, which is, could AI lead to new publication modes, i.e. videos, images, interactive formats, replacing traditional manuscripts? Phil, I know you have a vested interest in this.
So will AI lead to different publication types?
Yes, publication modes, it says, but yeah.
Publication modes. I mean, I would like to see more types of content, more types of outputs being legitimately viewed as primary research objects. I think sort of building on what Jen was just saying about the systemic component of it, behaviors are driven by incentives, right? And currently what we do is as a system, not as publishers, not as academics, not as not as funders, but as a whole system, currently what we do is we judge research based on how exciting the outputs are, or how exciting the outputs appear to be, not on the quality of the research that is done. So that encourages people to discard negative results. It encourages people to talk up things. It encourages people to do something called harking. I don't know if anybody remembers this one, hypothesis after the results are known. which is to do a set of experiments and then do a particular set of statistical tests that would only be valid if you started with the hypothesis in the first place, then repeat them over and over again until you get something that is statistically significant, publish that. And there's an awful lot of information there that has just been absolutely discarded. So I think that in terms of like video and data sets and various kinds of project entities and all sorts of things, we absolutely should be making those public, and we absolutely should be sort of swapping them and commenting on them and working on them together, and we should be giving credit for them and the quality of that work. Whether that is because of AI, I don't necessarily think it is. I think it's something that we need to be doing. I think it's something that will help us fight back against some of the negative incentives and some of the perhaps those things that have been amplified since the AI revolution.
Great. I know I said that was the last one. More of a comment than anything else. Jennifer, I'm going to come to you. There's a lot of questions about how, here's an example, how should authors responsibly use AI during manuscript preparation? Grammar, clarity, paraphrasing, is this acceptable? Question mark. There's a lot of variations on this. I think this varies between publishers, but there's also some STM guidance, I think, on acceptable use within manuscript preparation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is, from a Cambridge perspective, we allow all of those things. And again, it's about transparency. Different publishers have different ways of requesting that transparency. So some maybe require some kind of taxonomy of reporting of like how AI has been used. The general Cambridge approach is that we view it as you match the transparency to the how you've used it. So if you think back maybe 15 years, if you had someone help you with language editing, you would put that in your acknowledgements and say, thanks to my colleague Phil, sorry, it's picked on your name, Phil, for his reading of my manuscript. You could see that in the acknowledgement section saying, I used ChatGPT to polish the manuscript for clarity, whatever. So that would be in the acknowledgements. If it was for generating a figure, we'd want you to put that in the caption. So the same way that you're like, I used R package Shiny to do this, you would say, I used whatever model you use to generate the figure. So for us, it boils down to transparency, and all those uses are valid. And we recognize that, it's about communication. So if you can create a better and, clearer paper through using a tool like AI, then that's a win for readers. So it's good, but the author remains accountable for what's in it. So it comes back to what Rebecca was saying before about you have to be happy and content that what the AI has done fairly reflects what want the article to say and what you found.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I think that is extremely helpful to a lot of people in the chat. Thank you for that very clear advice. Unfortunately, we've reached our time limit. There's so many more questions that we could answer. Unfortunately, I've got a train I need to catch, so we will stop now. But some of these additional questions I'll circulate to the panelists, and if we get some interesting responses, we might write a blog post as a follow-up with some of these, because I think some of the questions are very interesting, and if only we had another 90 minutes, we should be able to answer them all. Thankfully for our panelists, we don't. So I would just like to end by saying thank you very much to everyone who attended. Thank you very much for your questions. And most of all, thank you very much to the panelists, Jennifer, Laura, Rebecca, and Phil. It's been wonderful speaking to you all, and have a great day.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming as well.
Bye.
Bye.